Hi, I'm Dr. Gilgamesh, and I'd like to introduce you to my podcast, Emotional Anatomy. It's an intelligently designed anatomy that has as its goal the recruiting your interest and curiosity as to how it works so that you can become more familiar with it and, as a result, better at it and enjoy it more. Welcome. Hello, this is Dr. Gilgamesh again. And today it's a repetitious process, isn't it? It's exploration of emotional anatomy. The concept here is that emotional anatomy is not going to change. We're developing a vocabulary that is going to change the way we look at the mind. It's going to help us look at the mind. It's going to guide our look at the mind. It's going to acknowledge our look at the mind. It's going to be labeling emotional anatomy. So the hand on the cave wall in France, 10,000 years ago, speaks of Homo sapien having been around for a long time and nothing's changed. DNA has not changed. So this is coming into the face of modern psychological principles that thinks that we are attempting to change people when they come to see a psychological person. And I'm, I guess, presenting to you, hoping that I can change that idea in your mind. No, I'm introducing you to emotional anatomy, which isn't going to change. Wounded emotional anatomy has emotional reflexes that in many respects don't change either. Now, those emotional reflexes cause pathways to form in the brain. They are emotional reflexes in response to emotional wounds. Oftentimes, early on in life, those emotional wounds then would seem to affect us later on, and we then adventure into the psychological process for greater awareness, mindfulness, insight, understanding, introspection. We gain ability to recognize the reflex before it takes over. So many of these podcasts are going to be many different ways of saying the same thing because it doesn't change. But it's nice to have a vocabulary that helps us understand and therefore navigate the ocean of emotion. A vast array of emotion, full spectrum, full possibility, and requiring for its accurate navigation, labels. We'll attempt labels in the long run, but not today so much. I think we're going to be acknowledging the ocean of emotion today. It's vast, it's not easily understood at first, but the vocabulary is useful because it condenses our effort to understand it into ocean of emotion. Now, the privilege of understanding this is awareness. The privilege is that the mind is made for this process. The mind is made to come alive in awareness of itself and how it works. And each of us, each generation comes upon the opportunity to reflect through vocabulary how it works. And it's how the mind works that we're after in this vocabulary, so that it can be shared one to another. Again, I'm suggesting that physicians will benefit from this most because when patients come to see them, they are going to have the responsibility of knowing how the mind works, and therefore being better able to help their patients navigate their experience. Okay, so everyone is privileged to understand this. It's actually a scientific idea, right? that if I am correct in using this vocabulary to help you recognize your own emotional anatomy, then for scientific purposes, you will be confirming my observations. All right, but it will be in your own words. I've called it an open source language because your words are going to be different from my words to describe the same thing. Yet the concept doesn't change. And there is frequently a description that others don't recognize because their experience of it is from a different perspective. Now, these emotional reflexes trigger other emotional reflexes which snowball into overwhelm. And therefore, we have to acknowledge that, oh, not everyone is privileged by this awareness. In fact, some are so deeply wounded, gosh, you've got to start slowly. You've got to creep into the subject matter. You've got to form friendship first. You've got to develop relationship first. You can't expect them to be able to recognize or even generate words to explain their experience immediately. It's leading them through the experience. So I'm going to use as an example the concept that AA offers, which is that it's a program of principles. I'm going to be developing a vocabulary that attempts to share not just the program of principles, but to share the principles that are governing this operation of mind, this operation of emotional anatomy, as I've mentioned, emotional reflexes. So I'm labeling emotional reflexes because that's the automatic reaction that sometimes we look at and say, oh my goodness, I did that again? What's the matter with me? Nothing, except that you're identifying emotional reflexes. And that those emotional reflexes, once understood, can be interrupted. That's what we're developing. The skill base that navigates emotional anatomy so that by seeing before the emotional reflex takes over and snowballs into its logical consequences, that reflex can be spotted before it goes off. Now, the program of principles offers us opportunity to share with one another the honest, open, and willing necessary for us to begin identifying the array of emotional reflexes that frequently dominate us. Oh yes, that's right. Remember now, we're changing here the vocabulary of emotional science from dynamic concepts. Now, dynamic is not a bad idea, but instead of believing that through dynamic concepts you can change the mind, this is through recognizing the dynamics of the mind, you can actually interrupt the dynamic and choose an alternative pathway, navigating the ocean of emotion. It is through choosing that alternative pathway that we see the condensation of all psychological science into freedom versus slavery. It's an interesting textbook, right? Very short. Once understood, you get it, and that's really all you have to recognize is that, whoop, that was slavery, and freedom chooses the better. Okay, so now we're going to realize that this is human emotional anatomy, and I'm going to be using an example and somewhat repetitious, but an example to help you recognize your own emotional anatomy. First off is that by responding to me in this video, you're having reactions already. What kind of an old man is this? And that, as I've mentioned before, right, I come by this project legitimately, and I've been through years. I mean, I count myself having studied this stuff for over 55 years. The story is remarkable. My brother is a schizophrenic. And so as I grew up and went into medicine, my father and grandfather and great uncles and his father, fifth generation medicine, what was I to do but to figure out what happened to my brother? He got wounded. How? We're not sure, right? I mean, viruses, dynamic consequences. Who knows exactly what that was? I don't think that we know yet. Dementia precox. I don't think we know yet. We've had plenty of history trying to describe. But what I'm attempting here is a vocabulary that assists us in the navigation rather than suggesting that we know exactly how it goes wrong. It is by this vocabulary of navigation that we're recruiting you to join us in this effort. You see, each of us has our own take on it. Each of us can only see through our own eyes. And therefore, your contribution to the word combination that will be describing our emotional anatomy becomes very important and valuable to the future of the world. We'll cover all of this over time, and gradually it will become clearer. But it is by repetitious study, and that's why I'm recruiting you to join us for more and more podcasts and start entering in your comments to our Facebook pages and the streams of thought that come after one of these podcasts and that I'll be joining in and offering comments as well. We're going to develop this vocabulary further so that it works more effectively for more and more people. Okay, so today I'm going to start with the example of I'm not an alcoholic. Why do I have to go to this meeting? Or other ways of recognizing thoughts as addiction as well. Because after all, if I don't need to learn this material, then I'm not going to study it, and I'm not going to recognize the value of choosing freedom versus slavery. I'll reject the idea and run for the hills. But choose. Which will you choose? Freedom versus slavery. I've said before, over 99% of the people that I meet with invariably choose freedom. Now, I live in the United States, and it could be our heritage of concept that allows the majority of people here to think freedom is a valuable concept. But I'm going to claim, and here's the paradox, I'm going to claim that it's going to be easier for the autocratic nations. It's going to be easier for a Putin to implement these concepts into his nation than it will be for us to bring these concepts alive into our nation. That he could give an order and the teachers would study it. Whereas in our country, I've got to recruit you and you get to recruit your neighbor, and that we all get involved in this language. Now, that would happen in their country as well. So it may not evolve very fast there because they would not be free to explore, free to contribute, free to argue about this language, free to contribute to an open source language that changes as necessary for the population. Because many people, they can't relate. As an example here, heart home, right? Again, now as a very valuable way of understanding emotional anatomy, because from your heart home, the experience discovers the lens of awe and wonder. That's awe and wonder, and introduced to us by Albert Einstein. On the website, you'd be able to find his quote. We'll go through that eventually in the podcast as well. But now, the idea of coming into a room with a whole bunch of people you cannot relate to, that's not me, that's not me, that's the alcoholic that I'm not. Therefore, I can't relate. Wait, no, it's a program of principles, and this brain does not change from person to person. So how do we go about this? Well, we recognize then that all people are dealing with this. All people are struggling with this. All people are stuck, slaves to their own idea. I'm not alcoholic. I'm a leader. Okay, well, good. I'm glad. Join in. Thank you. I'm glad. On the other hand, are you free to be something better? You see, freedom chooses what's better and isn't stuck with its last idea. And that's what makes freedom powerful. So take, for example, the young person who comes in distraught and objecting to all of the requirements that are part of their recovery from whatever it is they're dealing with. We meet them in the psychological sciences, but take the person who has never even approached psychological science and is refusing to even consider the possibility. What do I need to listen to this for? Freedom versus slavery. It's that simple. Well, make your choice. Again, freedom. But what about those behaviors that are automatic? What about those thoughts that are automatic? What about those feelings that come upon you and you don't have any idea about how to deal with them? Well, if there's a reference point, it's navigation, remember. So if there's a reference point, then we can begin understanding how to find our way. Very fortunately, I've understood that the Polynesian people navigated the Pacific Ocean successfully. Even some would argue for the last 40,000 years they were doing this. And now through Nainoa Thompson, they're doing it again. But I am recognizing now what we're talking about is navigating emotional anatomy. So we need a reference point, similarly as the Polynesians would use stars to determine their longitude and latitude and position on the planet and be able to find again Hawaii in the middle of the ocean. That concept I am now using to find our heart's home in the middle of our psychological science. Because from there, you begin to look back at the organism. You look into the organism through a new lens. You see, that heart home opens a lens which is part of the emotional anatomy. You're not going to be able to change it. Where's my thumb? It's not going to change. Where's your heart's home? Well, to give you another introduction to this idea, I will be repeatedly offering you the chance to return there with me. One person was kind enough to share their youthful experience. They came upon a pasture of mammoth bulls at sunset. And it was spectacular for this person. They were a Taurus. And indeed, they identify themselves with the powerful bull. All right, this isn't mystical. This is real. They have identified themselves with that. That's how their brain works. That's their emotional anatomy. And they identify with that powerful bull. In fact, so powerful, hey, that's not me. And powerfully, they would object to this exploration or even the consideration that their thoughts are as addicted as any alcoholic could be. Now, the alcoholism is specific. It's a chemical addiction. And when the body is exposed to that chemical, it activates dissociated spaces in the brain that cannot see this full spectrum of awareness. They escape into a sector of the brain that wants to be numb, most often, but yeah, it's all right. It's more complicated than that. but escaping into numbness. Some people through food, some people through intellectual pursuit, I suppose. And yes, there is also the prioritization that would make this experience my addiction. Okay, maybe so. What a pleasure. So this strong Taurus, and observing as a child this powerful meadow of bulls at sunset with colors spectacular, of pinks and blues and oranges and greens, etc., etc. And the muscles and the breath and the noises and the power behind these huge animals as compared to the small child. Wow. They were aware of it. They found it. Their youthful experience. Now, not everyone is privileged to have such a specific, wonderful, peaceful, beautiful vista. Consider this. A picture is worth 1,000 words. Okay, a movie, old-fashioned, ran at 16 frames per second. That's 16 pictures per second. Multiply that out, 16 times 60 seconds per minute. And how long were they standing at this sunset? Give them a half hour. That's quite a few words. Thousands upon thousands of words. If a picture is worth 1,000 words, 16 frames per second, and they have a memory that is capable of returning to that place and seeing it and smelling it, even tasting the air. Wow. We'll be returning to our heart's home many times throughout this experience, because it's different when the reflex carries you into a different part of your brain. But from that, through that lens of awe and wonder, from that position of your heart's home, and through that lens of awe and wonder, you have the chance of understanding what I'm saying and continuing this exploration with me further and contributing a vocabulary that will help us make this easier for the next guy.